Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to do a little bit of an overview presentation to introduce systems thinking and show how that relates to federated digital twins. So really what I'm keen to do here is draw a very big picture. And the way I thought I'd do it is by doing a fairly simple why, what, how. The why, defining terms, setting the context, and trying to introduce this idea of systems thinking. In the what, I'd like to explore this approach, which is outcomes focused and systems based, and in the how, show us how we can apply systems thinking pretty much to any system. So a slide that you might have seen from me before to introduce the built environment, it's an amazing thing. I would say that just as a matter of fact, it is a system of systems because it brings together all sorts of important, in fact, essential services. So our economic infrastructure, energy, transport, water, waste, telecoms, all of those are complex interconnected systems, and they're also interdependent. And so transport doesn't work if energy doesn't work, energy doesn't work if telecoms doesn't work. So you can see that interconnection happening. And then it's the same thing for social infrastructure, and everything sits within the natural environment. So when you add all of that together, you get built environment as a system of systems. You could call it connected places. That's really good to see how amazing our built environment is. However, it's not run in a connected way. So what we find is that across the built environment, there are these organizational silos that mean that it's really difficult to get the connection across those very connected systems. And this is not the only issue we have, because we also have some very connected challenges, not least of which would be climate change, which is real. We've caused it. We have to do something about it. But there's a whole set of challenges which I would suggest are really interconnected challenges that cannot be solved in silos. If you've got connected challenges, you need connected solutions. So whether we want to address adaptation or achieve energy security or move towards a circular economy, all of these things demand a connected approach. So if I just summarize what I think is a problem, we've got very connected systems and we've got very connected challenges. However, we've got very siloed organizations that try to run the built environment, and we've also got very siloed information. So even if the organizations, even if we got our act together and had the connections between the organizations, we still wouldn't be able to do the job right because the information required to do that is in silos. And the built environment, I think, is a very specific case because of its longevity and because of this interconnectivity, because of how essential it is to society. It demands an approach that is strategic and long-term and joined up. And that's not the approach that we've been giving the built environment. I think there are some really good signs on the horizon. So for example, the 10-year infrastructure strategy is a really good thing that we're now trying to have that longer term approach. But up till now, we really haven't brought this kind of approach to the built environment that it demands. So what's the solution? I think the solution is to bring systems thinking into this space. It means we have to advance systems thinking. We need to drive positive systems change. And the reason really is that by applying systems approaches, we can achieve better outcomes with fewer resources in more lasting ways. And that's exactly what we have to do. So our job is to bring systems approaches to the built environment. These are not new to humanity. They might be new to the built environment, but systems approaches have been proven in other sectors. And so whether we're looking at cybernetics or systems dynamics or system science, complexity science, all of these things do exist, have been proven, they work, and we can bring them to the built environment. What we have to do really is identify the best of those, the best tools, the most applicable approaches, and bring those. And I think at the heart of this approach, this systems approach, is to start with the end in mind, to start with the outcomes, to understand that if we're going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really something humanity's agreed, but they're at a global level, we have to have some outcomes articulated in a way that works for us locally as well. To have these aligned outcomes all the way through, from global through national, regional to local. But that has to be our starting point, because that's what we intend to get from our built environment. And then we need to understand the connection between the systems that we have and the outcomes that we want. Very often that is through the services that the systems provide, and the systems that we have to play with are built and natural systems. And we need to really recognize that the big challenge here is to understand the systems better so that we can intervene more effectively to get the better outcomes. And so that starts to point to an approach which is outcomes focused, it's also systems based, and it has to be community enabled, because it demands a type of collaboration, a radical collaboration that we probably haven't hitherto seen. But if we want to get these better outcomes, then we have to do that level of collaboration. It kind of is in contrast to the prevailing view. I would suggest that in our industry, we generally have a project-based view, where we think that the world begins with planning and then we do the design and build and handover. But what we can recognise is that it always starts from something. The planning starts from something that already exists, and the handover already is always handing over into something that already exists. And then we can see that that thing that already exists is the same, what it comes from and what it goes into. So we can wrap it round and see that actually what we need is much more of a systems-based view that put the systems at the heart of it, and then the planning, the designing, the building and the integrating kind of come from a place that we already have. And then at the heart of it, where we get the value is from the use of the built environment. And that kind of relates to my previous diagram talking about the services that the built environment provides. And so with this slightly different way of seeing the world, seeing it through the lens of systems rather than seeing it through the lens of projects, then we can see many things differently. So just as an example, one example would be with the circular economy. So with the circular economy, if we're just having a project-based view of the world, then really the only thing we can do to drive a circular economy is reduce construction waste, increase recycling. Now that's a really good thing to do. Of course we should do that in the context of projects, but there's so much more we can do if we see the whole system, because then the objective comes to maximize the value of use of the built environment. And so that means really we can get more out of what we've already got, and that is the better way to go for a circular economy. So this means really we need a change of mindset. We need to move from the idea that we somehow do our projects and get outcomes to seeing that the systems are in the way. Spend a bit of time kind of articulating what systems are there. But I think it's really helpful for us to see the projects as interventions on the system, which hopefully modifies a system that then delivers the better outcome. And if we're now digging into what systems thinking is, very often it's about understanding the components of the system and the connections between them. And I think if we were to look at transport systems, you can instantly see the connections between road and rail and air. We don't always have an integrated transport system. We talk about it. Maybe it's not as integrated as it could be. But then transport fits into a bigger system of our economic infrastructure, and that fits into the bigger system of our built environment. And so we can see here this idea of kind of the nesting of the systems, but fundamentally it's about these elements and the connections between the elements. And then we can see something I think quite similar in our organisational systems, where there's connections between individuals, but individuals fit into an organisation, organisations are connected, and then the organisations kind of fit into sectors and the sectors are connected. So we've got the same sense of elements, connections and nesting in our organisational systems. And if we take it up one step further, just to get to a point that I think ends up being quite fundamental, is that there are these connections between our physical systems, our organisational systems, and importantly for us in the Digital Twin Hub, the informational systems. And if we get these connections right, then we can understand the overall built environment better, intervene more effectively, and get the better outcomes. So this, for me, is the connection into our digital twin land. That if here we have our built environment, we can see all over the place different digital twins popping up. And then this idea of federating them, getting the data connections between digital twins to work, so that we end up with an ecosystem of connected digital twins. Something that we've been talking about for a while. But I think that this systems-based view that is focused on getting better outcomes really provides us with the context within which we have to understand the systems better, intervene more effectively, and connected digital twins are absolutely key tools to enable us to do that. Okay, so I said I'd just do a quick introduction as to how we might apply systems thinking. So this is going to be very high level. I'm going to go through it very quickly, but hopefully it will be useful because I think we can apply it pretty much in any system that we want to look at. So step one is to define the outcomes. Is what are we trying to achieve? And what we'll recognize is that with the systems that we already have, the outcomes that we already get from the systems that we already have are probably not what we want. We want to get some better outcomes. And so that creates a delta in the outcomes. And that change, that difference between the outcomes we have and the outcomes we want, effectively drives all the other change. That then means we need to understand the systems. I've already said that systems are more often than not about the elements, the connections, but also systems are always part of bigger systems. So we kind of need to understand the things that come across the boundary and have an impact on the system we're looking at. So then we understand the system better. That can be through modeling, can be through all sorts of observational techniques. But at that point, we can define the interventions. And the interventions, hopefully, we will make at leverage points where the minimum amount of intervention will make the maximum amount of outcome. But we won't know that unless we understand the systems better. And that's not quite the end of the story, because we also have to observe, learn and repeat. Because when we make an intervention, it will modify the system. We have to learn from that. And when we modify a system, hopefully it will improve an outcome, but not always in the way that we expect. So that means we need to observe the outcomes too, which then informs the next intervention. So this provides a continuous learning loop that helps us continue to understand the systems better and intervene more effectively. And I think that we can do this at any level. So for example, if we want to put inside the little circle of our system just the rail system, that would work. Or we could take it up a level and put as our system of interest the whole transport system. Or we could take it up to a whole city, or if we want to go the full kind of the whole hog, we could put the planet in the center. But I think that basic approach that I said of identifying the outcomes, understanding the systems, identifying the interventions to make is a simple framework that you can apply pretty much to any system. And we can do it across sectors, which I think is really important. And so, for example, wouldn't it be great if we could have Wi-Fi working on every train wherever we go? And so this is a connection between transport system and the telecom system. At the moment, that connection isn't so good because they sit in separate sectors and we have these silos that I talked about before. But you can kind of apply systems thinking across those sectors. And we've done it in many ways with Credo, where that was looking at an information flow across sector boundaries. In the case of Credo, it was between water, energy and telecoms. I'm just illustrating here a connection between energy and transport. And again, wouldn't it be fantastic if we had that information flow that would enable us to see electric vehicles as part of the energy system, and so that in understanding that system we can potentially modify both the supply and demand of the energy itself, because you don't need so much energy generation if you're managing the batteries in the cars better, but also potentially to manage the supply and demand of the transport itself, because you could, as just an example, get cars to park up, be incentivized to park up and charge at peak times, so you manage the traffic. All of this stuff that I've scooted through, I've gone really quickly because there's not much time. We've written up in a paper, an industry paper that was published on the 3rd of July called Connect to Change. I'd commend it to you. We spent a long time to make it short. It's got a lot of support. You can see a whole bunch of well-known organisations which have endorsed it. It has a number of recommendations, so it's not just a paper, but it's something that we need to take forwards, and we're looking to take it forwards by building this consensus, a shared understanding of systems thinking, building communities that will drive those recommendations, and hopefully therefore to drive positive systems change. So just to conclude this rather breathless run through an introduction to systems thinking and the connection to digital twins, I firmly believe that it's time that we see the built environment differently. So not just as a series of construction projects, not just through the project lens, but see it as a system of systems that has a real purpose. And the purpose is to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. And I don't think this is just a nice little concept. You know, we are now in a place where these challenges that we're facing, these cross-systems challenges, are so serious that if we don't take a systems approach, we will not be able to address those challenges. So we effectively have to do this now, but it also makes good sense. It makes good economic sense to get better outcomes for less input. So kind of let's do it. So I hope that we can build on the messages of Connect to Change, build this consensus, build the communities, and drive positive systems change. And with that, I would like to thank you.
So Mark, our first question is, it seems like our political masters tend to care more about projects for which they may claim credit and systems. How can we get their behaviours to be more mature?
Yeah, I mean, it is a great question, and it kind of goes to the heart of the issue, I think, because we need to have this connection that I talk about kind of from top to bottom, all the way through from government departments and regulators and arm's length bodies. So I think part of it is that we've got to make the case, because people won't make a change, just because somebody says it's a good idea. I think that there needs to be very clear, hard economic evidence that this connected approach really does provide value to the country. And so I think that that's the starting point, that there needs to be convincing evidence-based arguments that will kind of tip the balance. And I think that because that's so important, we've put it as recommendation number 1 of that paper that I said, the Connect to Change, to undertake a built environment systems review, which effectively would tell us what we've got in our systems as a starting point, how it's performing, indicate that it can perform better and we can get better outcomes from what we've got. But essentially, it's to provide the economic evidence that systems-based approach really does provide value. I think that's the core.
Thank you very much. Next question here is, with AI being a new big shiny thing the government thinks will solve all of our problems, do you think there needs to be strengthening between the links of AI, data sharing and digital twins in this systems thinking? And if so, how?
Yes, like very much so. We totally have to do this, don't we? And I suspect that the question has been asked tongue in cheek, because I think that AI doesn't work without good data. So we got to get our data sorted out, and it's one of these kind of most boring things that somebody has to say it, that we got to sort out our data. We can't just stay with the kind of the shiny AI stuff on top. We got to do something about getting the data in a fit state for use. So that is absolutely essential. And then, as we know on this call, it's not just about having data fit for use, but also data fit for sharing, because we need that data on the move. We need the data sharing infrastructure, and these become essential foundations for actually getting the value from AI. But also, as we know, they're essential foundations for getting digital twins to talk to each other. And so we're speaking in the same space. This thing about sorting out our data and sorting out our data sharing infrastructure are essential for the information economy that we all want to move towards. And it's not just for shiny AI. But let's also not denigrate AI, because AI can do some amazing things. Once we do get our data sorted out, and once we do have data sharing infrastructure, we should absolutely maximize what we can do with AI. And I think that one of the greatest uses of AI that doesn't get talked about very much, but we all know about, is in generating models, because we know AI is really good at matching input and output. And if we've got physics-based models at the heart of our digital twins, it makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it, to replace our physics-based models, which are computationally heavy and expensive and they take a long time to run, replace those with machine learning models that match the input to the output and get trained on the data that comes from the physics-based models. It's like, that's a really obvious thing that we should be doing. And the promise of that is enormous. So what I'm saying is, let's not denigrate AI because it's wonderful, but also let's get the foundations right that unlock it all.
Thank you. Next question. Who, individuals and organizations, do you think needs to be in the room to enable and execute this new approach?
It's another really good question. And I think in many ways, it's kind of all of us. This has to be a collaborative exercise. I mentioned how we need the radical collaboration to make it work. But the promise of doing that is huge if we get it right. So I think fundamentally, this is a collaboration between government, industry and academia. And it's for the benefit of civil society. That's where the collaboration has to work. And I think that kind of collaboration can come from having a shared understanding. So it's really important that those of us who can see a way forward, so who can see that there's real benefit going down this route, those of us who can see that need to work together across organizational boundaries to produce the shared understanding, to produce the economic evidence that will then help the people who don't yet see it to get the same picture, so that we can all move forwards. But that collaboration has to be at that kind of cross government, industry, academia level, I think.
A final question. As well as moving away from projects to systems, what about products? What new products are being introduced to help with this transition?
Another really pertinent question. So one thing I should clarify is that I'm not against projects, by the way. Projects are great, and projects are still the best way of getting something done. I think I'm just arguing that they're not the only thing, that systems matter. We still need the interventions. Interventions are projects. So we're not kind of getting away from projects. We're just seeing a bigger picture and putting projects in a right place, and in the right context. And I think in that same big picture, we can see the products, because if we want to kind of draw the full picture, you can see that resources go into products, products go into assets, assets go into systems. And what we have to do is maximize the value of the whole system. So that means we need to maximize the value in use of resources and products and assets and systems. That's the challenge. And so products totally fit into this picture.